you're gonna build or buy a PC, you've probably asked yourself, solid state drive or hard drive? The truth is that most modern SATA SSDs are just going to be faster than hard drives, and NVMe SSDs are going to be even faster. Anyway, thanks for watching, you know the drill, like, dislike, haha, I'm just kidding, there's so much more to know. Silliness aside, where SSDs in general really shine is when data is written or read sporadically and all over the place. So for example, just running an operating system on an SSD will feel so much better than running it on a hard drive. You've probably heard people say, oh, just upgrade to an SSD, and this is because it can make your system feel snappy. Also, launching an app or game will feel much more speedy on an SSD than a hard drive, and this is because apps have a bunch of separate libraries that need to be accessed, and hard drives have to physically move their read-write head all over the place to open it. However, it's not all bad for hard drives. They actually have okay sequential reads and writes, so copying a large file like a 5-minute 4K 60fps video might be the same as an SSD. But taking everything into account, the performance of an SSD will be better than that of a hard drive. However, I think it's worth mentioning that there are SSDs without DRAM that you might want to watch out for. Also, let me know if you want a video explaining DRAM-less SSDs. They're still faster than hard drives, but they're noticeably slower than a typical flash SSD, and they also tend to fail a little sooner. Now, I mentioned fail, so what about the reliability of an SSD versus a hard drive? Again, since a hard drive has moving parts, those moving parts are susceptible to failure, although modern hard drives are much more reliable than those from a few years ago. Luckily, you can usually tell when a hard drive needs to be replaced. You can usually hear the head making buzzing or clicking noises, letting you know that it might be semi-stuck and ready to fail. As for SSDs, they can also fail. Just because they don't have any moving parts does not mean that they won't fail. In fact, repeatedly writing to an SSD can cause it to die faster than a hard drive would. However, an average consumer will get to keep their SSD for a long time thanks in part to something called wear leveling. In short, wear leveling is when an SSD distributes data to the separate chips on the SSD to extend the life of the overall drive. Think about how you don't put all of your items on the top shelf, you distribute them over all of the shelves. Now, while physical failure makes a big part of a drive's reliability, data decay is also another aspect of it. For hard drives, they have their data stored in groups on the platter, and these groups are made up of bits, which is the actual physical data. These groups can sometimes have the inclination to rotate and corrupt your data. This is generally not a problem, but you may want to watch out for it if you're rocking an older hard drive. SSDs, by contrast, store their data on a bunch of NAND chips by retaining a charge. While these charges can be maintained away from a power source, these charges can unfortunately get weaker if they haven't been powered on for a while. This data loss can be further hastened if the SSD is in a hot environment. This data loss can be slowed down if you power on your SSD regularly and make sure it gets plenty of airflow, if it's in a PC. So let's go back to the analogy to the shelves for a minute. What if you have a lot of items to store on those shelves? Then would you choose a hard drive? And this is why people choose hard drives, because it's so much cheaper than its SSD counterpart. Like the 2TB Seagate Barracuda is $55 and the cheapest 2TB SATA SSD costs like $120 more. Yes, hard drives are slower, but they're great for mass storage. You could store all of your music, videos, spreadsheets without needing to upgrade your drive for quite some time. And it's also because of this that an SSD backup drive makes no sense at all. You don't need blazing fast speed to back up your data. So hard drives are not dead yet. They still give you a lot more storage for your money. Now, up until this point, when I mentioned SSDs, I was really alluding to SATA SSDs. But there's also another type of drive that is an SSD, but it uses the PCIe bus instead of SATA. And this is, of course, NVMe, or Non-Volatile Memory Express. Now let's clear one misconception before I get into any more details. Drives that look like this aren't necessarily NVMe drives. They can still be SATA drives, and this is because M.2, which is the physical connector, can be SATA or NVMe. Anyway, as I mentioned, NVMe drives use the PCIe bus, meaning that they have far higher bandwidth caps than SATA. SATA 3 is limited to 6 gigabits per second, while PCIe Gen 3, X4, the X4 indicates that NVMe drives use only 4 lanes, is limited to about 31.5 gigabits per second, and PCIe Gen 4x4 is limited to a whopping 63 gigabits per second of total throughput. Of course, no NVMe drive right now can utilize the total bandwidth, but still, pretty impressive. Obviously, we've established that NVMe drives are light years ahead of hard drives in terms of performance, and still quite a bit faster than regular SATA SSDs. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of how the speed is achieved, but it has to do with not having moving parts as well as using a much faster interface. However, NVMe drives still have a lot of drawbacks. The first is that they're really expensive, generally even more than SATA SSDs. On top of that, they really don't make much more sense to buy over a regular SATA SSD. The fact is, most people won't even notice a difference between a good SATA SSD and an NVMe SSD. Boot times will be practically indistinguishable, and unless you transfer huge files back and forth, it doesn't matter that NVMe drives have higher limitations. Really, the only reason you would get an NVMe SSD is if you were doing storage-intensive tasks like transferring lots of files or video and photo editing, and even then, a SATA SSD might be a better value. Which isn't to say that if you find a really good deal on an NVMe drive, you shouldn't buy it, because you can get them on sale pretty cheap sometimes. Now, I did explain a lot of things, but you might be going like, so SSD or a hard drive in my next build? And I would say both. As long as you can afford it, a 256 or 512 gigabyte SATA SSD paired with a 1 or 2 terabyte hard drive is definitely the way to go. Also, don't go NVMe SSD unless you find a really good one on sale. For backup storage, I will say hands down to just get a good, reliable hard drive from a good, reliable manufacturer like Seagate or WD. Anyway guys, thanks for watching this episode of Techxplained, and you know the drill. Dislike it if you didn't like it, like and subscribe if you did, and comment any tech topics that you would like to see explained in a future Techxplained video.